I more than hope, I firmly believe that the United States is going to end the death penalty, and that someday we're going to look back and we won't even believe that we ever carried out executions. Pope John Paul II called it cruel and unnecessary. I thought that was probably about the best summary that you could do for the death penalty. And I think a big part of what I hope that I've been able to do is running the campaign that ended the death penalty in New Jersey by just going around the country and talking to the wonderful people who are doing this work around the country, to help them believe they can do it. Because at the end of the day, we've got to believe, right?
Welcome to the Legacy Project. My name is Jim Copple, president of the Servant Forge Foundation. We're an organization committed to leadership development with a specific focus on service. This podcast and its related activities are about sharing the legacy we have inherited and discussing the legacy we still want to create. Legacy is more than cars, houses, boats, and material possessions that we want to leave to the next generation. Rather, legacy is about core values and beliefs that we inherited from a previous generation. They are the values that shaped us and defined us. Legacy is also about the values we develop or create that can be passed on or shared with the next generation. We will interview people from various backgrounds and walks of life. Some are famous, some, well, maybe not so famous, and others are simply our neighbors, our friends, people who live ordinary lives doing extraordinary things. Become part of this project by being intentional about legacy. More than just memories, but principles that have guided our lives and shaped our decisions. What is the legacy you choose to create? That's what we want to discover. Okay, this is Jim Copple with the Legacy Project. And we have the honor and distinct pleasure today of introducing and interviewing Celeste Fitzgerald. Celeste is involved in the death penalty, abolishing the death penalty in this country, and she currently lives in Florida, where she works with the Floridians' Alternatives to Death Penalty. Right, and she has an interesting background, an interesting perspective that I think many of you will enjoy and benefit from. So, Celeste, where were you born?
I was born in Long Island, Nassau County, Long Island.
So you were in the Northeast most of your life and career?
Yep.
Yep.
Born and raised in New York, and then moved to New Jersey when I got about 7 years after I got married.
You have siblings?
I do. 2 brothers.
2 brothers. What do they do?
My older brother is just retired from a long career in insurance, and my younger brother is a sort of consultant for big companies finding people to work for them, but he's not a headhunter. I don't really understand what he does.
That's true with most of our siblings.
Yeah.
I think my brother looks at me quite often, given the work I do. So you work in HIV/AIDS, police reform. You'll always have a job. Yeah. You'll always be employed. So what did your parents do?
My father was an insurance executive, vice president with a home insurance company, and my mom was a homemaker.
Stayed-at-home mom, huh?
Stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. So, what kind of faith tradition did you come from?
I grew up Catholic.
You grew up Catholic. So you're involved and have been involved and been very successful, actually, in the work to abolish the death penalty in this country, and particularly in New Jersey. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is it in your life or in your background that served as a catalyst for wanting to get involved in abolishing the death penalty?
You know, I get asked that a lot, and I struggle to really understand why the death penalty spoke to my heart and why I felt like I ought to at least try to end it. And the best thing I can really come up with is that I've always been very sensitive to suffering. You know, it is probably because, you know, my father went to Jesuit schools, Regis and high school in New York City and Fordham University, and was on a racial justice committee in Fordham, and was always involved in, we had a lot of talks when I was growing up about civil rights and racial justice and just justice, social justice, you know, in the Jesuit tradition, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I'm just someone who, when I see suffering, I feel like I need to do something about it. I'm probably the last person that could ever go into service in terms of providing service, right? But I'm really good behind the scenes, trying to change policy. And I'm very impatient. I like to achieve change and to do it very strategically and with a goal in mind and to achieve that goal. I guess I shouldn't say I'm impatient now as an older person, but when I was younger, I was pretty patient.
So were these the kinds of conversations you would have around your dinner table when you were growing up? Or
yes.
Those topics would often surface.
Yes.
And so you saw that exemplified in the values of your parents?
Yes.
Grandparents? Did you know your grandparents?
Yeah. I don't, my father's father died very young. My father's mother, I now know, was quite involved in helping other people, particularly even though she had very little money after her husband died, single working mom in New York City. She helped some young girls go to college, and she would send them small checks. I have letters of thanks written to her. So
What about teachers?
Teachers in the family? My teachers. I can't think of one. Isn't that awful?
Huh.
No.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And you went to Catholic school?
I went to Catholic school. There was, I was in a sodality in grade school, St. Anne's in Garden City. And Father Farley was an influence.
And where did you go to college?
I went to college 1 year at St. John's. My dad got transferred, and I had been dating my husband. He flew out at one point, asked me to marry him, and I got married. So I didn't continue in college. Although I did go back when I was working full-time when my kids were a little older, and went to a year at Rutgers University.
So you never completed a degree?
Did not complete a degree. I have about 2 years under my belt.
It's funny. Colleen, my wife, is in the same situation as you. She went to BYU, Brigham Young University, for 2 years. And in fact, she was under consideration for a presidential appointment and didn't get it because she didn't finish college.
Oh, my.
Yeah, which is just crazy.
It's crazy,
because given the contribution that she's made in the field and the contribution you've made in the field.
Well, it never held me back. In fact, if anything, my work on the death penalty became so, all-encompassing that I actually had to stop going to school in order to continue the campaign.
Yeah. So you write proposals.
I write proposals.
Yeah. How did you learn to do that?
Proposals. Well, my work on the death penalty, I was a real estate agent when I got very sick with a benign brain tumor. And the surgery was kind of a big deal, and it took me a while to recover. While I was recovering, that's when I got contacted by a man whose daughter was murdered. He was a retired legal aid attorney who wanted to end the death penalty. And his story is quite incredible. And so I actually went to a church basement meeting with 5 individuals, and we started New Jerseyans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. At that time, I had to go back to work. I had been a real estate agent, didn't want to go back to selling real estate. So I went and started writing proposals for KPMG. I was an administrator of a consulting practice there, but it was an engineering practice, and they needed someone who could write to help work with the engineers on big proposals.
Yeah. So you're good at developing budgets and objectives and goals. And
oh, yeah. I learned it there, and also at a national organization called Equal Justice USA hired me as their first field organizer after I had started in New Jersey on the death penalty. And so I left KPMG for what I call my near volunteer work at Equal Justice USA, and really learned everything about strategy from Equal Justice USA. It's a remarkable organization.
So what does a field organizer do in the line of work, especially on the death penalty? Sure.
So I ran their field office, which basically meant I ran my own work. And I would help the local groups, my 3 states were New Jersey, my own state, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, and help them think through their needs, their goals, take them through a strategic process, everything from, what is your goal? What are your objectives? Who can give you the objectives? What do they need to hear? Who can tell them what they need to hear? All right, now that you have the strategy, what do you need staffing wise and toolbox wise to get this strategy done? And then how do you fund it? Like through the whole process, your classic strategy process. It works quite effectively.
So I'm curious, you yourself have never really had a family member or close friend facing the death penalty, or have you?
No, but it's interesting you ask, because after I started working on the death penalty, I started in 1999. On September 11th, 2001, my husband's first cousin, was killed in the World Trade Center. It was a very odd crashing together, is the only way I can think of to explain it, of my work and personal life. Very painful for our family. And so I did experience that loss, and I was, I just adored her. Everybody did. She was a remarkable person. And then a few years after that, our pastor was murdered by the school custodian a few doors down at St. Patrick's Church in Chatham. And Father Ed was a big influence on me, and he had nominated me for an award. He had lobbied with me on the death penalty. Oddly, about a year before he was murdered, I had given a talk at a Catholic Charities dinner where I got an award that he nominated me for. And my talk was about what I had learned about human dignity from families of murder victims and from the wrongfully convicted. And I just, again, it felt like my life, my personal life and my professional life was kind of crashing together. I also knew Jose, the man who was arrested for his murder. Yeah. And he was sentenced under the alternative sentence because it was considered a crime with aggravating circumstances. It would have been a death penalty case.
So how do you fuel your empathy, and your passion for this issue, this topic? I find in the Legacy Project, as we interview people, that their greatest joy is when they can bring their empathy or their passion together with what they do every day. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? It's
a gift if you can marry together your passion and your empathy. I find that it brings me joy every time I think about a step that I have to take strategically or, in one way or another for work, where I am able to remind myself that the issue is front and center. And if I keep in mind the goal, what I'm trying to do and why, then I'll almost always make the right decision. If you put the people that are impacted at the center. And when it comes to the death penalty, I don't think that people really think beyond the person who's harmed and the person who has committed the harm to all the other impacts that the death penalty has on our communities. And further, I think there's a lot of assumptions about murder victims' families and what they want and need. I've worked with, at this point, hundreds of murder victims' families over the last 20 years. And what I hear all the time is people tell us what we need. They never ask. So, when I meet these extraordinary people who, despite their loss, are speaking out, and regardless of how they feel on the death penalty, every victim's family member I've ever met wants to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. right? They're just incredible people. Same with the folks who are wrongfully convicted. Yeah. The generosity of spirit keeps me going every day.
Yeah. Talking with Celeste Fitzgerald, who's working with the Floridians for alternatives to the death penalty here in Florida. She was very active in this work and largely responsible for helping develop legislation in New Jersey to find alternatives to the death penalty. So you're creating a huge legacy. What do you want your children to know about you?
That's a great question. I would that I tried first and foremost. That I took my empathy, if you will, and I acted on it. When I saw an injustice, I did something about it. There's so many issues that to me are difficult ones, right? You can name so many of them and you can see a lot of different sides. I feel like the death penalty was very glaringly unjust. It went against every principle I have, every moral value I have. So it was an easy call for me to make that decision in the end to leave a career and work on it. So I tried and I acted, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Great. So in our lives, we have symbols or icons that remind us of where we came from. I actually have a black box that my father gave me, and inside that black box, it's actually an old medical kit from the Second World War. And in that black box, I have an admission letter from Harvard University. I have an ex-wife wedding ring. Okay. I have a whole bunch of little symbols or icons that describe where I came from, what I do. What are some of the icons in your life that remind you of your past and of what shaped you?
In 8th grade at St. Anne's School in Garden City, they gave each of us a plaque upon graduation. And you didn't know what plaque you were going to get or what the quote was going to be. And my plaque was a quote from Bobby Kennedy, the famous one, "Each time a man stands up for an ideal, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope." I still have it. Actually, my son has it. At one point, when he got his first apartment, I was so thrilled to see it prominently displayed in his bedroom. So for whatever reason, that plaque spoke to me in 8th grade and continues to speak to my son, Jeff, clearly. Hopefully he'll leave it to our grandson, his nephew, Alexander.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great legacy icon. I often define hope as that experience which pulls us into the future. Mm-hmm. And that's not an abstract idea. It's an experience where you give voice to it. As you continue your work and the legacy that you've inherited, the legacy you are currently creating, what's your hope?
Oh, I more than hope, I firmly believe that the United States is going to end the death penalty and that someday we're going to look back and we won't even believe that we ever carried out executions. Pope John Paul II called it cruel and unnecessary. I thought that was probably about the best summary that you could do for the death penalty. So, and I think a big part of what I hope that I've been able to do is by running the campaign that ended the death penalty in New Jersey, by just going around the country and talking to the wonderful people who are doing this work around the country, to help them believe they can do it. Yeah. So at the end of the day, we've got to believe, right?
Yeah. So Stephen Covey wrote a book a number of years ago called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The second habit is living with the end in mind. And he has you go through this little exercise of imagining if you attend your funeral today, what would people say about you? And then he asks you, if you had the opportunity over the next 10 years to shape what it is they would say about you, what would you want them to say 10 years from now? And so my question is, at your funeral, what do you want people to say about you?
So I have a new grandson. So the only thing that comes to mind is that she was a great grandmother. it's so front and center.
Yeah.
What can I say? That little face, Alexandra, that she, at the end of the day, really what matters to me right now more than anything is that my kids would say that she was a great mom.
Yeah.
If my husband outlives me, and he probably will, because he's in great shape, that I was a good wife, and absolutely, I hope I'm a kick-ass grandmother.
Yeah, that's great. I have a grandson who is 8 years old, and he said to me not too long ago, he said, "You're the best grandpa ever." And I said, "Well, how many grandpas have you known?" He goes, "I think you're the only one."
Yeah.
So it's a high standard, but that is a good standard to work for. Well, we've been talking with Celeste Fitzgerald, who is very active in the ending the death penalty in this country, and has had some great involvement and successes and met some incredible people. Okay, I've got to ask this because there are people who follow me on this podcast that know my passion for Bruce Springsteen. You've met Bruce Springsteen.
I have met Bruce
Tell
Springsteen.
me about that.
Well, yeah, I was invited to table for New Jerseyans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. I brought my son and his friend Mo with me, and Bruce's manager came up and said he would like to meet you, and so I got to ride on this very fancy elevator that I guess people don't get to go on in Madison Square Garden, where all I could think of is the Knicks go on this, the New York Knicks travel on this elevator. And I met Bruce and his band, and he actually handed me his playlist for that night, which was on a piece of paper, just handwritten. And he invited us to hang out on the stage in the background, and we did.
Wow. Yeah, I've been to 18 of his concerts, and I'm impressed. If nothing else you've ever done,
Yeah,
I'm impressed.
That's really my claim to fame. I mean, really, let's
Do you still have the playlist?
Let's be real. I don't. So the gal from New Yorkers Against the Death Penalty was a big Bruce fan.
Uh-huh.
I have to admit I was not. And so she was freaked out, and so I gave it to her. But I will say that when he saw us, he knew there was New York and New Jersey. He said, "So who's from Jersey?"
Yeah.
I was like, me.
That's the right question, and you had the right answer. Well, Celeste, thank you so much for participating in the
my
Legacy
pleasure.
Project podcast, and I appreciate the work you're doing and the legacy you've inherited, but the legacy you are creating, and you're continuing to create it. And this is an important issue in this country. And I, like you, I hope at some point we look back and go, what were we thinking?
Oh, we will.
Yeah.
Trust me on that.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Celeste. To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. We want to hear from you. We want to get your ideas and your opinions. I have a new book that corresponds with the Legacy Project titled The Seeker, Bring Me the Horizon. You can find a copy of it on Amazon or your preferred book distributor. The book corresponds closely with these podcasts. The podcast episode was produced by Matt Erickson and edited by Carissa Erickson. The music is by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode of our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build a future.